Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm the psych coach, and today I'm going to be talking to you about assertion. Assertion is an incredibly valuable life skill. I'm sure you know people in your life who are really assertive, and perhaps they're people that you admire. Assertion can often be confused with aggression, and if you're someone who isn't particularly assertive, you may assume that in order to be assertive, you need to be aggressive and ultimately unlikable. But that's not the case. I'm going to spend today's video talking to you about how you can improve your assertion in a way that is consistent with your personality and isn't contingent on you becoming really aggressive and unlikable. Assertion is simply a way of expressing your needs or opinions. It's speaking up, and that doesn't need to be done in a confrontational way. What you need to be careful of though is if you are quite avoidant of being assertive, you may have some misconceptions about it. You may be under the impression that if you practice being assertive, you'll become a bit like a bull in a china shop and people won't like you. You might worry that you'll become rude. That simply won't happen. Learning some assertion skills is self-improvement. It's giving you a voice. It's improving your confidence. It's not going to change your personality. It's not going to make you go from being a really kind, considerate person to someone who's really dispassionate and unkind and aggressive. That won't happen. So rest assured, putting into practice these skills will help you and they won't change your personality. Tip number one for practicing assertion is to start with a graded hierarchy. Graded hierarchies are a principle in psychology whereby you start small with the smaller things that are challenging and you build up to the bigger things. It's pretty straightforward, but what it is useful for you to do is to think about your own graded hierarchy and rate difficult situations from 1 to 10. Start with what would be your most difficult situation with regard to your assertion. Maybe it would be pushing back on your boss or saying no to a family member. That goes at your 10 out of 10. Then you need to think about what your 1 out of 10 is. Maybe that's speaking up in a restaurant about something you don't like. Maybe that's asserting yourself when it comes to seeing a friend about where you'd like to meet. And then try and fill out the in-betweens. Building a graded hierarchy gives you a structure for practicing being assertive. And the idea is that you start on level 1, you start by practicing expressing your desire of where to meet your friends for a coffee. And you then, once you're comfortable with that, you build up to step 2. Then you build up to step 3 and 4 and so on. Don't move up the steps until you've got comfortable with the step you're on. If it feels too difficult, then break the steps down even further. My second tip for building assertion is to combine assertion with politeness. Those of you who are watching this video are probably leaning more towards the less assertive side of things, so it may feel like an easier pill to swallow if I say that you need to combine assertion with politeness. Politeness is saying, excuse me, I'd really like to assert my opinion here, or please may I just express my disinterest in what's just been said, or my disagreement in what you've just said. Being polite will keep consistent with your personality, which is presumably polite and considerate. Or if you are someone who struggles with assertion because you tend to be aggressive, then reminding yourself to be polite will rein you in a bit. Assertion is politeness. It's about politely expressing your request for something. It's about politely asserting your opinion about something. Politeness is valuable both if you struggle with assertion and indeed if you are too aggressive, because assertion is about being polite. It's about being considerate to other people's needs, but it's also about being considerate to your own needs. And that's what needs to come across in a polite way, your own needs and your opinions. Another tip with developing your assertion is to pick your battles. Sometimes when people are practicing assertion, they get the wrong idea and think that they need to be assertive with everything. That every situation they need to speak up in, with every situation they need to have a confrontational viewpoint or a disagreeable viewpoint, and that's not the case. The art of assertion is knowing when to pick your battles and when to leave things alone. And of course, being assertive doesn't always entail a battle anyway. But this is not about you constantly speaking your truth, speaking your mind, being rude to people, or thinking that every single situation you need to speak up in. No. Some situations are simply better to be left alone. Some situations probably don't warrant the effort of you being assertive for very little to come of it. Now, if you don't practice assertion much, it can be easy to convince yourself that most situations don't want you being assertive. So remember, you do need to be challenging yourself daily. However, you do not need to be picking every single battle. Know that some situations simply aren't worth you speaking up in, and you can just call it quits. You also need to remember that speaking up won't necessarily change someone's behaviour, or it won't change someone's opinion, but it will, over time, change your self-worth and self-perception. Which brings me nicely onto my fourth tip, which is you recognising that you are worth speaking up for. It's very difficult to be assertive if you don't believe you're worth it. So remind yourself that your opinion and your feelings are just as valid as the next person's. There's no reason why they're not. If you've got it in your head that your feelings and opinions aren't as valid as the next person, then it's worth considering where that comes from. Is that because as a child you were shut down and encouraged not to speak very much? Is that because you've been in a relationship where your opinion wasn't taken into account? Remind yourself that that simply isn't the case now. You are your own independent person, worthy of expressing your opinions, likes, dislikes. So do speak up. You are worth it. And that brings me on to my fifth and final point, which is the importance of I statements. Using you statements is quite accusatory. You speak a load of rubbish. You don't know what you're talking about. You always say you want to go to X, Y, or Z place. You never take into account my needs. It's quite confrontational, and it allows a lot of scope for disagreement and arguing. When you're being assertive, the key is to use I statements. I would prefer it if you didn't speak to me like that. I find it very challenging when you're so oppositional. I would prefer it if you didn't do that. I find it quite uncomfortable when you're rude to me. These are I statements. They are very difficult for someone to argue with. It doesn't mean that they won't argue with it, but you are simply owning your experience and how you feel in a situation. And reminding someone that that is your experience and that is your feeling will hopefully just stop them from getting into a no, that's not true scenario, because it's your experience and it is true. So use I statements because they're less confrontational, and they also mean you're owning what you're saying and stopping someone from trying to dissuade you otherwise. Practicing assertion is a really important life skill, and as I said at the start, you need to do it gradually. You need to start with the easy and then build up. But it is possible to build your assertion skills with daily practice. So make a commitment to do it, think about how you're going to practice it, and get started. If you've enjoyed today's tips, please do hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and I will give you plenty more tips on how you can use psychology on a day-to-day basis.